Hi everyone, my name's Deanna and I'm here with Georgie Brooks and Arabella Dorman, and we're super excited about our talk tonight with Arabella. I'm just going to blab a little bit while we wait for everyone to actually come into the room. So I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I just wanted to let everyone know that the chat box is available for questions. If you want to ask Arabella any questions during the Q&A session at the end, please type them in the chat box and we will be relaying them to her. If you have any questions as well about to Georgie about the eye hospital or the guild, I'm sure she'd welcome those as well. Great, so I think we've kind of got everyone in now. So just again, a reminder, questions in the chat box, but right now I'm going to hand you over to Georgie Brooks, who's the chair of the Guild of the Eye Hospital, who hosts fundraising events in aid of the eye hospital specifically, and they do marvelous, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with their Gift of Sight Fair, which is going to be taking an online turn this year, and all their other events that are just absolutely wonderful and splendid. And yeah, so over to you, Georgie.
Thank you, Deanna, and thank you. That was a very lovely introduction. Thank you very much for joining, everybody. We're delighted to welcome Arabella as our guest speaker this evening for our Guild presentation. The title of the presentation is The Audacity of Hope. A bit of context around the Guild, actually, now that Deanna's mentioned that. This would have been our annual Guild lecture, which is an ongoing series, usually held at the Brompton Oratory in South Kensington, and some of you may have actually been to that. But due to the ongoing restrictions on social gatherings, we're hosting this online. And we're really grateful that you've joined us. Thank you, and thank you for donating to this event and for joining us this evening. Arabella is an award-winning war artist and one of Britain's leading portrait painters. She's the winner of the Global Mosaic Award and shortlisted for the Art and Christianity Award. Her works have been internationally acclaimed in raising global awareness about the consequences of war, forced displacement of people, and human trafficking. This beautifully illustrated presentation takes you on a journey through the Middle East, including to the St. John of Jerusalem hospitals in Gaza and Jerusalem, revealing the human face of contemporary conflict, exploring universal themes of exile and loss, as well as profound courage and hope. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Balfour Project, who very kindly shared their webinar Zoom feature so that we can host this talk with many of our supporters around the world. And we are going to be recording this talk, and as Deanna said, if any of you lose your connection during the talk, we can email this to you afterwards so that you can catch up. Thank you again for joining us, and I'd like to hand over to Arabella.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. This is the first time I've done a Zoom presentation, so I hope you can bear with me if I don't move the slides along accordingly or anything, but thank you again. Before we start, I would actually like to dedicate this series of talks to my darling mother-in-law, Tara Elliott, who has given decades of her life in tireless hard work and commitment and real dedication to this wonderful cause. Tara, if you're listening, you are such an inspiration to me, to all of us, and this is for you. When I came up with the title of this talk, The Audacity of Hope, we were living in pre-coronavirus times. Now, however, we find ourselves at a time of national crisis, of confusion, with significant impacts on every single aspect of our life. We are facing, all of us, an uncertain future. And I think as a result, we seem to be living in a higher key. We have more awareness of the fragility, but also the preciousness of our life and what the human touch, as this painting refers to, really means. COVID has brought with it new challenges, personal tragedies, loneliness, frustrations, thought-provoking changes, social restrictions, yes, and economic hardships. But for some, while it's been a time of great suffering and loss, others have found it a time of profound awakening, an opportunity for reassessment and a relearning of ourselves in relation to one another. I believe this has given us a real opportunity to rediscover the importance of the human touch and the common threads of life that bind us together. As a portrait painter, and I'm here in my studio today in London, and a war artist, I've always been fascinated by what it means to be human today and how the arts can explore that meaning. These past few months have given us an acute distillation of the human condition, both the bad, but I mean, we only have to look at the rises in cases of domestic violence, for example, but also the good. As in war, this pandemic has exposed our raw human vulnerability, but also revealed what we are capable of in the face of adversity. We've all witnessed over these last 6 months moments of poignant beauty, individually and collectively, that has illustrated our capacity for endurance, courage, resilience, and love. This is a crisis in which all the old certainties have been shaken up as we continue to find ourselves in a permanent state of uncertainty, of the unknown. And within this shake-up, within the political wranglings and increased public fatigue of today, children, as in any crisis, are often the hidden victims. It was to highlight the plight of those children that I actually painted this earlier in the year. Sadly, this situation, this painting, is not just restricted to the consequences of COVID. Looked at in another way, this painting could point to the fact that COVID has revealed to us or brought closer to home some of the deprivations of war and refugee status today. Fear, disease, curfews, restrictions, economic crises, all of them reminding us what it is to live under the shadow of war. Now, these deprivations might be new for us, but they are actually everyday realities for those living across the Middle East. For the Syrians who've endured 11 long years of civil war, or for the Iraqis or Afghans who've endured decades. Let alone for the Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank, which is all the area of operations for St. John's Eye Hospital Group. Working in an environment of perpetual political instability with high poverty rates, St. John's is the oldest and only charitable provider of eye care in the Middle East, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or the ability to pay. I had the immense privilege of spending time across everywhere that they work for a few weeks in 2017, and I was humbled day after day by the dedication and care of the doctors and staff that I met. They ceaselessly worked from Hebron to Gaza, where this photograph was taken, in deeply challenging conditions. I saw these heartrending scenes in Gaza when this young girl was brought in for crucial eye surgery, without which she would have been blind in probably a few years, denying her any hope of really an education, probably marriage, and therefore a future in that part of the world. And yet she walked out of this hospital a couple of hours after the surgery and with complete vision. Now, the long-reaching effects of St. John's work just cannot be overstated enough. The deprivations, of course, in Gaza are too complex and monumental to go into right now. But I found myself thinking back to my time in Gaza when I was in Syria a couple of years ago. If only, I thought, there could be a St. John's hospital there. This was Aleppo in 2018. And my last night, after a couple of weeks in Syria, I lay in bed and I could not sleep for the boom, boom of sustained bombing over southern Damascus, over the suburbs. I lay in the dark, imagining all those people trapped underneath what you see in front of you, or trying to flee and not escaping. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, bereft and inconsolable, pinned down by the bombs that have destroyed some of the oldest cities in the world. This was the great Umayyad Mosque of Aleppo. You see in front of you the Seljuk minaret that was built in 1090, that now lies in ruins. Something that took years to build and it stood the test of time for centuries was brought down in a matter of moments. Human history eradicated in human hands. Now this unique minaret cannot be rebuilt. I felt the same when I watched Notre Dame burn on television. When you stand amidst these ruins, it shakes the very foundation of our belief in anything permanent. The past is lost to the present, and in the present, in Syria today, that is profoundly marked by an absence. Within all this, though, what strikes me is that out of that absence, out of that negation, a positive can be born. And I saw it in these young men who were turning the war-torn city into their playground for something called parkour, their acrobats. They were scaling the ruins in pursuit to forget their pain, as they told me. Now, we can see the state of the world today, from climate change to COVID, as very dark at the moment. I'm sure we all do. We're fed by the modern media with an inexhaustible supply of doom and gloom, and sometimes it's hard not to. But when we look at the good things like this, like these young acrobats, or the incredible work that the staff of St. John are tirelessly continuing to do to provide hope and care in an otherwise very bleak landscape, I think we can feel reassured. Their work to me here is an expression of the best in the human condition, of the desire to heal, to reach out to one another, to give a child the gift of sight, and to change a life forever. I found it incredibly moving to witness the work being done across the whole St. John group, as it resonated so much with me as a war artist, since what I try to seek out is the human spirit that rises up out of the ruins of conflict or despair, or in this case, lack of vision. And that spirit that gives people the courage to start to live again with purpose and with hope. Hope. I believe hope can often be most readily found in some of the most desperate and afflicted parts of the world. This was painted in Afghanistan, and it really reveals that my interest is in the possibility of renewal. This child put at the center of the painting, to me, is a symbol of that renewal. She's a symbol of the light that burns brightest in the darkest corners of the world. A little like St. John's is that light. Now, within all this, I think one focuses on the individual stories of tenacity rather than looking at the collective violence of war. And I think it's scenes just like this that reveal not just the long-term consequences and immediate impacts of conflict, but the human face of endurance, which is really where my particular interest lies. I try not to dwell on arguments for or against political parties, nor on opposing strategies, which across the Middle East can be very confusing, or on the overwhelming modern machinery of contemporary conflict. I try to allow the experience of the individuals to reveal the impact of the political and military decisions. Now, of course, we all know that the drivers of today's conflicts are the governments, the politicians, the leaders who sit in their palaces. They are not the ones who suffer the consequences. Real wars are fought by the civilians who have endured so much more than probably most of us can ever imagine. When I was in Homs in Syria, I spent an evening with the local ladies who had lived under siege for many years. They were desperate to tell their story. They couldn't believe the world had stopped listening to them. They had all lost their homes, their neighborhoods. Some had lost entire families, and they wanted to be seen. They couldn't believe that nobody had done anything. One lady said to me, "I lost my car." "Okay, I lose my house. Okay. I lost my neighborhood. Okay. But when I lost my 2 children to those bombs, this is when I thought I couldn't go on, but I do. Another lady said to me, we make from destruction, construction, from death, life. This is the will of the Syrian people. We love life. We love peace. We want to go from the worst to better. If you are not looking for the better, then you are dead. Now, the voices that I heard amongst those still living in Syria were not entirely broken. They were those of defiance, of anger, and of longing. Longing to heal what has been shattered, to mend what is broken, and to gather what is scattered through a language of peace. It is profoundly humbling to listen to a people who have encountered and endured such horror and hate, speaking of their desire for peace and their urgent desire for repatriation of the young, of the students, of the talented, of a whole generation. The truth is, though, that they can't go home. There is no home to return to and no security to protect them if they were to, in many areas. Some of the Syrians I talked to in Lebanon were terrified because they said if they went home, they would simply be disappeared or be forced onto the front line through military conscription. So these people become refugees, each with their own individual dreams and lives and hopes. What becomes of them when they cannot go home and yet they cannot move forward? What becomes of the children, girls who remain prey to trafficking and systemized sexual violence today? Trafficking of women and children is the fastest growing enterprise in the world, by the way. When it comes to a battle between morality and money, sadly, the latter will prevail. I met one young Syrian woman called Ravda, who had been systematically raped since a very young age. She wrote to me, or wrote to the world, I am a sister, daughter, friend. Most importantly, I am a human being. I am here to say no to rape, to marriage, to keep my childhood dreams. This is Dana, who sleeps with her beautiful eyes open. Dana, raped at the age of 6, again and again. Faced with this increasingly urgent situation, it is hard to know how to respond, how to act, how to find one's place morally and ethically in today's world. Indeed, so overwhelmed are we by this continuous newsreel of sadness and atrocity that the temptation is to look away. In doing so, though, I think we deceive ourselves into thinking we can do nothing, into compassion fatigue, or as Pope Francis puts it, the globalization of indifference, which settles over us, obliterating the sharp edges and the urgent need for change. Instead, we could see the state of the world today, whether it's a crisis of forced migration or a global pandemic, as a call to imagine who we are in relation to one another. And in doing so, to find the common thread that binds us together. Life, after all, is what each of us has in common. And this installation, entitled Suspended, made up of clothes that refugees, Afghans, Iraqis, Syrians, discarded on arrival to Lesbos in 2015, I gathered them up and I created this installation. I traveled to Lesbos at the height of the refugee crisis, having spent the previous decade working in Iraq and Afghanistan. I felt a culpability to go out there and document those people coming across the borders and fleeing the countries that we had said that we were helping. These people arrived in Lesbos and said to me in their own words, I come here for new life. I come here for hope, for peace and education. Now, I didn't go to Lesbos thinking I could change anything or to find any solutions, but I did go in the hope that I might be able to create something that would lay down some sort of moral matrix for having that urge to change things. for making their urge intelligible. Sadly, there is no clear strategy of change when you're faced with this. The sheer number of people arriving there in 2015 was 5,000 a day. It was overwhelming. The scale of the human drama and tragedy was very hard to bear. Within the chaos, however, one of the things that struck me were these discarded clothes that were strewn all over the olive groves and the camps and the roadsides. And I picked some of these up, and I was immediately struck by the powerful presence of the people who must have worn them. Where had they come from? Where were they hoping to go to? What dreams had these clothes carried? Suspended, my installation, therefore, is not just a mass of clothes hung chaotically from a cathedral roof. It's a collection of portraits of hidden stories, undoubtedly full of loss and pain and memory, but also of incredible courage and endurance. Stories like these unseen wearers of the clothes that can only be imagined at. When I was working on this installation, there was a real intimacy, a visceral quality to handling the clothes, and it still haunts me. I found what affected me most were the smallest details, poignant expressions of human vulnerability, lovingly yarned tights, little children's tights, or a little amulet sewn onto a baby grove for safe passage. Now, these clothes ask us to consider, did this child ever see his first Christmas? Or was it buried like this under the rubble? A Christmas celebration that was never to be enjoyed, presents never to be opened, card games never to be finished. Each of these items hold an inner story, illustrated by this personalized t-shirt that speaks so poignantly of happier times. These are people just like us, not just a faceless category. Each shoe, like the wearer of this one, each wearer is unique, precious, carrying its own secrets, as one of my favorite poems by Yevtushenko writes. No people are uninteresting. Their fate is like the chronicle of planets. Nothing in them is not particular, and planet is dissimilar from planet. And if a man lived in obscurity, making his friends in that obscurity, obscurity is not uninteresting. To each his world is private, and in that one world, one excellent minute. And in that world, one tragic minute, these are private. And in any man who dies, there dies with him his first snow and kiss and fight. It goes with him. When we are confronted by this, we are confronted by our own humanity. But for the accident of birth, these children could be part of a family that come into my studio keen to be painted. Or children like our own son, full of ideas and wonder. Or girls like my daughter, who are allowed to, hopefully, grow up slowly with laughter and smiles and security. So alike, but so unlike these refugee children from Syria. These are orphans of war that I met in Homs. They've been robbed of their parents, robbed of their childhood, their safety to dream, a whole generation lost to displacement. I am motherless, fatherless, homeless, broken beyond repair. I was protected, respected, unaffected by death's unrelenting stare. But do you care? Do you dare look into my eyes and fall deep into the chasm of my sorrow? Or hold my hand as I face another tomorrow? Will you share my pain? Will you borrow it just for a while and let me rediscover my smile? Now I am a mother to my orphaned brother. No more pink ribbons for my hair or the company of even my teddy bear. Sometimes I see glimpses of her, the beautiful girl who looks just like me, except she can't be me. She was whole, and I am the leftovers of war. She was really happy. Happiness is a dialect I cannot speak anymore. Have you recognized me? I am the ashes scattered between 3 syllables, refugee, left in the grasp of a bittersweet memory of childhood. As I stepped gingerly through the rubble of a bombed-out schoolroom in Aleppo, I imagined these children returning to search for the ruins of their looted childhood. Outside, though, I heard children running in the streets and a football being kicked around, and it reminded me that life goes on. Within all this sadness, there are glimmers of hope. And I believe that if we look for that hope, if we look for that good, we will find it, which is what I saw again and again working with St. John's. Their work, I think, epitomizes the wonderful motto, it is easier to build strong children than it is to mend broken men. These children and all the families out with St. John's are very lucky to have come under their care. But for others, the thousands of children who are now in camps and streets across Europe and the world, their future is not so assured. One woman in Homs said to me, when a child dreams of a glass of water, that is humiliation. Imagine being the mother to that child. I sketched this scene shortly after these two had been rescued from the Aegean when I was working in Lesbos. It was incredibly traumatic. The whole boat had very nearly drowned. And people were being pulled out of the water. They were praying, they were crying, while this lady sat so still, so dignified, holding her only baby. And I felt that what I was drawing was actually biblical. It was almost like the Holy Family's flight into Egypt, but it was being played out every day. It was humanity laid bare. You will, I'm sure, all remember 2015 and the terrible number of migrant deaths at sea in the hands of the traffickers. I'm sure none of us will ever forget the terrible picture of little Alan Kurdi washed up on the beach. Well, my response was this installation called Flight. It was a boat that I salvaged from Lesbos and brought back to Piccadilly, one of my more ambitious projects. And I hung it above the nave of St. James's over the Christmas of 2015. This boat was found in the Aegean. It had 62 refugees on it. It was adrift and taking on water. Without a doubt, had the Aegean Coast Guard not come to their rescue, they all would have met a watery grave. As you can see, I hung 3 life jackets coming down from its bowels, so to speak. The lowest one is the smallest, it's an infant one, to represent the Holy Family and the infant Christ. Of course, Christ was born to refugee parents in extremely dangerous circumstances of political instability, a young boy who grew up to change the course of world history. The response to Flight was completely overwhelming and global, actually. Drawings and letters and poems flooded in from around the world, depicting dreams of safety and security in the reality of flight and persecution. One person wrote, "The smugglers are traitors. They said we would not reach Greece in 15 minutes. They said the children would not need life jackets." His wife and 7 children died, trapped under the deck of a boat when its engine failed. I think it's difficult to imagine human beings more powerless than children trapped under the deck of a boat with no life jackets. Now, I know that art cannot change the world, but I hope that people who stood under that boat, under Flight, or under my installation Suspended, might have felt something of the cry of anguish that I felt standing on those beaches or in the ruined cities of Syria. These installations are that cry. It's a plea that such suffering cannot go on, and a call to resistance against the destructive horror of war and the greed and corruption of those who seek to dehumanize their fellow human beings. It's also an act of empathy and solidarity as we reach out to all those in plight. Kafka once wrote, "Art should shatter the frozen seas within us." Many people cried underneath this installation, which went from St. James's Piccadilly to Leicester Cathedral and Canterbury Cathedral. But I like to think of those tears as the meltwater of those frozen seas, and in such a way, perhaps see art as an opening, as a conversation, very much like the words left by these Syrians who had lived for months on end under siege in Aleppo, but who held the strength in their heart and would not give in to despair to write these words, when in a time of bombs, these speak more eloquently than the shells, the desire for smile, love, and peace more loudly than the destruction of war. In a similar way, rather than trade on the aesthetics of despair, I really try and focus on that courage, that resilience, on the light that can banish the darkness, because so much of my work is about light. I lit suspended from the center with an orb that changed in density. As it brightened, it represented the light of hope by which a refugee travels, and the light within ourselves that might validate that hope. As it dimmed, it served to remind us all of the darkness in which we leave our fellow human beings should we turn our backs. So this installation really was my plea that instead of building walls, we build bridges. And in doing so, we recognize the human connection that this seeks to elicit. I try to open up a space in all of us in which we can make ourselves vulnerable enough to see afresh. It's very interesting, the word vulnerable. It comes from the word vulnerare, which means to be wounded. So to be vulnerable means to be open to being wounded. And to quote Rumi, the wound is the place where the light can enter. Now, I think you see that hope, that light in this little boy. It's God's gift to the world. But it's not a prize or a gift that is just given. It's something that we have to earn through resisting the ease of despair. Emily Dickinson once called it a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings a tune without words and never stops at all. When I was in Lesbos, of the many people I pulled out of the freezing cold sea, one was this little boy. He was terrified, he was shaking, he was crying. He'd been separated from his father during the crossing. It was something that the traffickers do. By dint of a miracle, however, we reunited him with his father and wrapped him in dry clothes. And he dug in his little child's rucksack and he pulled out this little toy which says, "I love you." When I turned to his father and said, "Why is he giving me this?" His father said, he carries it all the way from his room in Aleppo to give to the first person in Europe as a thank you for welcoming him. Now, can you imagine what I felt? I had to turn away in impotent shame with the words welcome and thank you ringing in my head. But this is what my work is about. It's about trying to make ourselves worthy of that thanks. So I guess I'm asking all of us here tonight, let us not be bystanders on the sidelines of history. Let's engage with these issues with empathy and a shared sense of humanity. I ask that we actually fulfill the words written underneath the Statue of Liberty, which are graffitied all over the refugee camps. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. No one becomes a refugee by choice. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that. To leave everything you've ever worked for, everything you've ever known and loved, and to go off on a journey into the unknown that is fraught with danger, to countries that you don't know their language or their cultures. This is something that you do when you're desperate. And without a home, everything is fragmentation. When we contemplate this, I think it changes our understanding of what it is to have and then to not have a place in this world. I guess what I'm really asking for is compassion, and compassion is hard because it requires the inner disposition to go with people where they are broken, where they are lonely, where they are weak. This is not our response to suffering. What we desire most is a vaccination, a quick fix, or to do away with suffering altogether by fleeing from it. But the reality is that thousands of men, women, and children are in limbo across Europe. This is made worse, of course, by today's current COVID pandemic and the fears that it engenders, including all the economic and political restrictions. Many of these refugees are children, and they're sleeping rough on the streets, trying to escape all sorts of threats. I imagine my own two children, on which I base this, lost somewhere in Europe, and I called this painting The Dreamers, where the safety of our home is but an imagined dream. Once you've heard a child cry out to heaven for help, but go unanswered, nothing is quite the same again. Children are the first victims of war. As a parent, I can only imagine the pain of watching a child grow up learning more about bombs and violence than books and laughter, hunger and fear rather than warmth and love. This child was brought into a medical outpost in Sangin, Helmand province, then and probably now one of the most dangerous places in the world. She couldn't walk, but as I sketched her crumpled little body, I didn't ask what had happened. I just sought to try to depict the fierce, tender embrace within her proud father. Now, these are not perhaps the things we think about when we think of Afghanistan, but they are the quieter realities found in the silence that falls when the clatter of guns dies away. And it's in the stillness of these moments that we can see the human face of war. And of course, its immeasurable cost on our soldiers as well as civilians. This is my main remembrance painting for all those who were killed in Afghanistan, and I did a similar one to commemorate those who were killed in Iraq. As anyone who has worked with the British forces will attest to, it's an extraordinary privilege to work with these men and women. Their courage is quite incredible, their dedication, their professionalism, their honour, and their very wicked sense of humour. In a way, I think that can be no better summed up than in the courage and the words of this soldier's pre-deployment letter to his parents. Please trust me, no matter what the circumstances of my death, no matter how fast, how slow, I am strong. My only suffering will be the realization that I will not see my family again. I will not suffer for fear or pain. Such feelings will not touch me. Sean Reeve was killed in action on his last day of his tour. Obviously, the grief cannot be imagined for his family or any of the families who have suffered such a death. But for civilians too, in Afghanistan and elsewhere, the pity of war goes on and on. The suffering and trauma etched deep into people's faces. This is a father, an Afghan father, of a son, weaned on a diet of violence and poverty. This is Afghanistan, and one wonders when this cycle of violence will ever end. Perhaps there's some hope in the recent peace talks. They're historic between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Perhaps it might allow this beautiful country and these beautiful people a chance to heal, to rebuild, and a chance for this boy to re-find his childhood, to fly a kite above his war-torn city, high and free, where he can dream of music, of dancing, of laughter. Because Afghanistan is a country of people who long to dance, like these schoolgirls who I met under the cliffs in Bamiyan in central Afghanistan. And they said to me, tell them when you go home that we are not just a land of men and beards and war. We are girls who love to dance. I was poignantly reminded of this scene when I was in Syria, in Aleppo, and amidst the ruins, I saw a group of teenage boys holding hands and dancing. And they said to me in very good English, you can choose to hold on to your sadness, or you can dance. To quote Rumi again, dance when you're broken open. Dance if you've torn the bandage off. Dance in the middle of the fighting. Dance in your blood. Dance when you're perfectly free. There's an old saying that I love, that if God exists, then he is like the sun, not only giving beautiful heat and light, but also casting long shadows. Now, war lies low in those long shadows, but the sunbeams can blast them away, and they come in all sorts of shapes and forms, like this old schoolmaster who in 40 years of conflict in Afghanistan never missed one day's teaching, or Syrians that I met who pray never to give in to hate despite the endless suffering that that country has endured. I met one apprentice monk when I was out there who was kidnapped and brutally tortured for 118 days. And when I asked him, how can you ever forgive your captors? He looked at me and said so simply, I pray for them, as I did in captivity and as I did before, every day. It was a pretty humbling experience to listen to that. But I do believe that this is really where the shadows start to recede and the possibility of hope and renewal comes forward, such as these Easter decorations in Homs, where I was actually there during the Orthodox Easter, and I met a man adorning what was left of the ruins of his house with these beautiful bows. Instead of crying, he was creating. Do you know, after the bombing of Dresden, the first shops to open were not food shops or essential maintenance or milk for babies. They were flower shops. And I think nothing speaks more beautifully of the human will for and towards beauty. Like the man with these beautiful Easter decorations, so much of my work is about learning to embrace our broken worlds and to find beauty within that brokenness. I'm interested in what holds people together, not what pulls them apart, in that connective thread of hope and endurance. On my last trip to Afghanistan, I went down to Lashkargah in the south, the police station down there, and I met with the first female police team. Think about that. These are women who have hope where no hope should be. Imagine the courage required to do that sort of job when often your whole family stands out violently against you, when your own brother threatens to shoot you every day because you're just trying to go out and make your country a better place. These women reached out to me like a sister. It was extraordinary. They could have resented me coming in and then disappearing after a day together, but they didn't. And as we sat and I sketched their portraits, we laughed and we shared stories. And then I talk about their work and they become steely and serious and discuss the daily risk that it imposed on their lives. But as we talk, I felt as though we spoke a universal language, that we'd known each other for far longer than that one day. And I like to think we spoke a universal language of sisterhood and of hope. Now, one of these ladies was called Islam Bibi. She was actually the head of the police team and a mother of 4 young children. She was shot dead on her way to work a few months later. She knew the risks, and she also knew that for every one of them, other women would follow her and rise up against tyranny and violence and not give in to fear or hatred. And that is really what my work is about. It's as much about that spark of divinity within the human spirit as it is about the tragedy of war. Yes, it's about exile and despair, but it's also about courage and hope that can be born out of the darkness. And it's about fixing our broken world with more light and gold. In our fast, dangerous, and often intolerant societies, it's really about the urgent need to act with compassion, integrity, understanding, and respect for our fellow human beings. And I can think of no finer example than the work of St. John's Eye Hospital to end with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arabella. That was very, very beautiful. Very, very moving. Thank you very, very much. I know we've got some questions that have been presented when people were registering, and I think Deanna has collated those. Deanna, would you?
Yeah. Just want to say thank you, Arabella. That was amazing. I just want to, if you don't mind, point out some of the people that we've got with us. We actually have Tara with us.
Oh, yay! Hello, Tara.
I'd like to hear that. So Tara, Elliot, we're all thinking about you. Please get better soon. We need you. We also, of course, have a bunch of guild members, Ursi, Lady Westbury, and Sarah Shilson, a past chair, and a bunch of others. Ahlam, who says, thank you so much. She says it's a beautiful talk about humanity. We need more like this for children of Palestine, because you bring out the plight of the people and the impact of war on them so brilliantly that, yeah, more of it, please. We've got Shirley Bailey as well, and we've got some trustees like Nick Golding and Jamie Ingham Clark, but also some past trustees. Hi, Nick Asprey, haven't spoken to you in a while. And just a whole bunch of our amazing supporters. So just, we're really honored to have you, Elizabeth Mellon here, and you know, Ginny Lovell. So just thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I know you'll join us in thanking Arabella for this talk. We have had a couple of questions that came in advance, so I will ask those first, but if you've got any questions, please do feel free to type them in the chat. I'm monitoring that, so we will ask them of Arabella. So I would like to ask you, and I'm going to flash out a picture that I've got as well, a couple of photos, but I know that you went to our fairly new hospital in Gaza.
Yes.
We've been in Gaza for quite a long time, but it was a much smaller clinic, and a few years back, it became we moved into this amazingly high-tech, state-of-the-art hospital in Gaza. And so I wondered if you had any reflections on the experience of how medical supplies and people and medical staff and so forth are moved back and forth across the border, because I know you had to experience that yourself.
Well, firstly, I think the fact that a hospital is in Gaza at all is a sheer miracle. I mean, I did that border crossing, and I wrote in my notes as I did it quite how challenging it was. Border, 3 checkpoints, 3 security gates, walk half a kilometre, PA checkpoint, walk another 1.5 kilometres, Hamas checkpoint, 1 more security, Gaza, 1 more security, again, in. So when you think about this is the tunnel you have to go down to get in there. It is incredibly hard, added to which you're only allowed basically hand baggage, as it were, the equivalent of if you were flying, and you're not allowed to bring hardly any, everything's restricted. So to build a hospital and to get the state-of-the-art equipment that I saw in Gaza there is completely extraordinary. And I think that's a real testament to your donors, to your whole team. But also, I can't say how moving it was. I can't say that enough or overstate it, to be there and to see the hope and the support that it gives people in Gaza, to know it's there, because it's a beacon of light in an otherwise really heart-wrenchingly tragic situation. And yet look at the staff, they were just amazing. They're smiling, they're laughing. And actually, when I left the hospital, there was a group of student girls who were all carrying books, and they were on their way to the university. And I thought, my God, If you could live like this, when you have no electricity, you have, you know, all your basic services are always compromised. This is how strong humans can be. And I think that hospital is just, well, what a tribute to St. John's, and what an important and crucial work it does as well.
It was actually one of the first major constructions after the third major conflict that erupted in Gaza. So we were very proud of that at the time, and
Well, you should be.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as you said, the resilience of the people. I mean, I don't know how they manage, but they do. So I've got another question about, the Guild fundraised largely for the mobile outreach, and you went on mobile outreach, didn't you, a few times? And
Yes.
You noticed that there was a large amount of women in attendance, which is one of the reasons why it was a project very dear to my heart, because something like 80% of people that attended our mobile outreach were women and children, and probably women and children that wouldn't have been able to have that attention, that healthcare, if we hadn't gone to them. So I noticed there's quite a strong focus on women and children in your artwork. So do you have any reflections on that? And also, did you find it challenging working in a predominantly male population and industry and area?
Well, firstly, yeah, on the mobile outreach, it was again, it was just so inspirational and wonderful to see how many women and children came in, and to see their gratitude, to see their joy at being respected as human beings, for one thing, and seeing their children getting help, and to see communities coming together underneath the umbrella of St. John's. It was a real privilege to be there, because these are women who perhaps would never be able to get any medical attention. And don't forget that in doing eye screening and stuff, the staff are also picking up on all sorts of other things, from diabetes to other fairly life-threatening conditions. So, you know, it's really extraordinary, the work for sometimes what is regarded as the second sex in those regions of the world. Which brings me on to your next question. How is it being a member of the second sex in those areas? And it's rather interesting, and I've encountered this all through my travels, that as a woman, and a blonde Western woman, often you actually have quite privileged access, because as it were, you're almost a third sex. You're allowed into the male world, but you're also invited into the intimate world of women that men can't have access to. And that's really special. And I often do very quick portrait sketches of people, as you saw in that photograph, to try and break the ice, and to just try and talk to them, even through body language or whatever. And I think it's really extraordinary how quickly and how close you can get to another woman. It's joyous. So it's a privilege. I don't see, as a woman working in a man's world, in any way hindrance. I really am grateful for being a woman.
We are pretty cool, aren't we?
We are.
We've got from Helena Shilson. Hi, Helena, the best talk we ever had.
Oh,
so we've got lots of comments about how amazing that was. Thank you, Arabella, for a wonderful and inspiring talk. God bless you, from David Basello. And Ginny Lovell, thank you so much. It was a really wonderful talk and very enlightening. The pictures are amazing. Georgie, have you got any questions, or should I take some of the others that have come in advance?
I think we've covered the questions that I'd taken at the registration.
Fantastic. Well,
what have come in?
My question to Arabella is, what next?
Oh goodness. Well, I'd love to do some work around what we're seeing now, because I really do believe that some of the deprivations that I've seen in other places in the world and in war are really coming to bear, not through violent conflict, but through more subtle ways. And I think domestic violence in children is a very big one. So I would like to focus my work a little bit more at home. But I'd love to actually go back to Jerusalem and Palestine and potentially Syria, and pick up on my work around children. Really how to get children off the ground and move them from their trauma, because the trauma from war across the Middle East and other parts of the world is so profound and so significant, and we cannot face a whole lost generation. Not only is it a human tragedy, but it is very dangerous for the world, and we need to see it as a universal problem, as a global problem, and act with solidarity. Perhaps the migration pact that was only decided on yesterday might give some spring to that, but who knows?
I am really pleased to say that I'm just looking at our donation total, and we were discussing this before we went live, weren't we, Georgie? That as you mentioned, this is normally the Brompton Oratory event, annual lecture series. And we set a target of £3,000 because that's how much this lecture event sort of brings in on average. And even though everyone's been so patient with all the technical difficulties and the slightly roundabout way we're having to do things to adapt to moving this online, a fair few of you have managed to turn up, so we're really grateful. And we've actually, with the donations that come in on Just Giving, as well as the offline ones, we've passed the target, so we're really pleased.
Yay, excellent.
Oh, that's
really
great.
Thank you, everyone.
And Georgie, all the hard work you've done, that's
exactly.
Well, thank you, Deanna, and thank you to everyone for joining us, because we're not all standing together with a glass of wine at the Brompton Oratory, but we are together on screen, and you've got to keep going, and it's great that we've adapted and that you've all come with us, and we're going to be continuing this. As Deanna said, we've put our gift of sight fair online. That's going to be a bit different. We've also got an auction at the same time, so that's for the first 2 weeks in November, and then next year. Yeah, and then next year, well, you know, we can't wait till we'll meet up in person. It's not going to be any time soon. So thank you for Arabella for doing your inaugural online presentation. It was beautifully done and really easy for everyone to follow. And thank you for everyone to joining us, and for Deanna for facilitating it as well.
And I just want to say that everyone that registered, whether they were physically, online here or not, will be able to watch a recording of this. So if you missed any part of it because of tech issues, you know, we will be sending it out, won't we, over email to those who have registered, so you'll get a chance to watch any bits that you've missed, and those that couldn't make it can have a chance to watch it. So thank you to everyone, and thank you again to Arabella. Bye everyone, see you at the next one.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Bye.